everybody, to another episode of Quarantined Coaches. This time we are somewhere close to New York City at St. John's University with the pitching coach, George Brown. How are you?
Good, Josh. Pleasure to be on with you and kind of talk some baseball, have some fun today.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you on because we agreed beforehand that it would be a better conversation if there was really no script about it. Like, let's just go for it. So St. John's is, in the little bit of talking that we had done, you said it's really not in like the city, and that's oftentimes what people think. And then I look at your shirt also right now, and I see the Empire State Building on there.
That's our view.
Statue of Liberty, I see. So yeah. Where is it if it's not in the city?
So I guess, small geography or history lesson for anybody that doesn't know, 5 boroughs in New York. What people consider New York City is Manhattan. We're in Queens, so we're across the bridge on the north side of what's actually Long Island, and we're, as the crow flies, I think it's like 13 miles to the center of Manhattan from St. John's. But depending on traffic, it can be 20 minutes, it can be an hour and a half. So when you come to St. John's, I think a lot of people are initially surprised. And I'm originally from upstate New York. Real upstate, like up Syracuse.
Where? My family's like west of Syracuse in the boonies, a town, Union Springs.
Yeah, I'm from Syracuse. So
yeah. Oh, crazy. See?
Yeah. So
I'm not planning this out.
Yeah. So it's a different experience for people when they get down there, because you hear New York City and you think Times Square, you think the Empire State Building, like you think that's what all of New York City is. And it's very, very different. At St. John's, we've got trees. I mean, it's funny. We have when people come to campus, we have black squirrels on campus, and people see them and look at them like they're unicorns. And it's just something you don't expect to see in what you would consider New York City.
So, it's a private school, right?
Private school, yep. Private Catholic Jesuit.
Is it $1 million to go to, or?
It is. It's just over 60. We're pretty, for the Northeast, pretty typical as far as what cost goes for school when you're talking about a private institution. There's some that are more, some that are less. But we've got a lot of avenues. We're lucky that the university has an academic profile that they try to bring in really good students. So we have a lot of academic money and things like that we can help kids out with, regardless of from where they're from.
Okay, private school, Northeast, costs a bit of money. Are you any good at baseball?
We do all right. I'm lucky enough to have played at St. John's, so it's near and dear to me. But we've had a lot of success. We've been very lucky to be supported by the university. We've had tons of great ball players who have come through. I mean, some of the ones that, if you're looking like the past 30 years, you've got John Franco, Frank Viola. We're both actually on the same pitching staff at St. John's. Joe Panic played at St. John's. Craig Hansen, that's one of our guys in
the infielder for the Giants.
Yeah, he's actually with the Blue Jays now. He was on the World Series team. He actually made the diving play up the middle where he did the glove flip.
He's still playing?
Yeah, yep.
I feel like he's been there for in the league for a while.
He was a first rounder in 2011.
Okay, first rounder out of St. John's.
Yeah. So we've had 9 guys make the big league since 2005. And we can get as deep as we want to into player development, because I think that's one of the things that we're really known for. We've had a lot of great coaches and players come through, between Coach Blankmeyer, Scott Brown, who's now at Vanderbilt, was my pitching coach when I was at St. John's. Corey Mascaro, who's down at Maryland. And then Mike Hampton, who's our head coach now. He's been at St. John's for 19 years. This was his 20th year. So we've been lucky to have a lot of continuity, but have a lot of really good players who have come through and done some pretty cool stuff.
I did see the success you guys have had on the mound. Is it fair to say that a majority of the guys that have gone on to the next level and really made an impact from St. John's are guys that came off the hill?
Yeah, I think of those 9 guys I mentioned, 7 of them.
I was even looking deeper than that, like in some years past and things like that. I mean, it seems
Yeah,
like
I
they're
think.
producing. I don't want to discount the hitting, but it
Yeah,
seems
no,
like
of
there's a
course.
lot of really good arms being produced out of there.
Yeah, and that's, it's a testament to a lot of things. I think it starts with the people that you bring in, because I think, Ed Blankmeyer was our coach for 24 years, and one of the things that he always preached was, you're only going to be as good as the players that you bring in. So the recruiting aspect becomes so important for all of us, because if you don't bring in good players, it's going to be really challenging to have a good team. So the development of those players then becomes paramount. And I mentioned Coach Brown, who I pitched for, and Corey, and something that I'm hoping to continue with the guys. We've had, I could tell you a number, but it'd be made up. But we've had a lot of pitchers go in the draft, and we've been very, very lucky to have a lot of good arms come through St. John's.
So you're the pitching coach. I know that the arms have done pretty well with you. What would you say is something we kind of did agree on one thing, that we didn't want to go down the same route here as every conversation, right? So what would you say is something maybe unique or different or fun about what you do with your pitchers that we want to hear in a typical response?
That's an awesome question. So one aspect of my coaching style, I think that guys, especially when they've been coached by other people that aren't used to, is I like to use what you'd call, like, I guess, the Socratic method of teaching and coaching. Is I want to ask them questions instead of giving them answers, because I think philosophically, like, you can teach a man to fish or you can give him a fish, and I'd rather try to teach them to fish, because if they can't explain what they're doing or explain what I'm telling them, then they don't really know it and they don't understand it. I can say, hey, you've got a good four-seam fastball. There's about 22 inches of induced vertical break on it. You should be this type of guy. And they can look at me and say, yeah, okay. But if they can't explain to me what vertical break even means, what are we doing? So if I try to ask them as many questions as possible, it's going to reveal, one, what they know, and two, what they don't. And it leads us down a path of the way that I do need to coach them. Because if they're going to be good for me, I need them to think a certain way. And some guys need to not think at all, and I'll learn that by asking them questions. But some guys need to really dig into the things that make them good and use that as well as they can.
My buddy was asking me the other day, what have I learned on this tour, on this quarantine coaches? Because I've talked to so many of you, and my response with him was just, there's so many great young minds out there that, like, we all don't, like, baseball people know they exist. I don't know if we know who they are. For me, it's really been eye-opening just to see, like, wow, there are dudes all over the place that really know what they're doing, and they could be at the highest level already. It's just a matter of, is there a job available for them?
Of course.
But at the same time, kind of looking back and talking to you now, it all seems so business, right? Systematic and analytics, right? Routine, everything. Like, where is the fun? Where is the, hey, let's go play football today, to strengthen our arms? Like, those kind of things we used to do, Are you doing anything like that with your guys?
Yeah, I couple of things we do. Physically, we do play a lot of knockout. A lot of the guys, we have, our locker room is like 10 feet from our main basketball court. So a lot of guys will get out there and shoot, and that's fun to see, just because, like, competitively, you'll see which guys, like, really want to rip your heart out, because you lose a knockout. For some guys, that's worse than losing, some high school games, because that's an element of pride. Like, I always prided myself on the ability to shoot. But on the field, one of the things, we get into a lot of discussions, and some would call it arguments, but talking about different things when it comes to video games, movies, and music is one of my favorite topics, because I think it can be a very divisive topic to discuss. And with recruits, it's the same thing, talking about hip hop and the current situation that is there. Guys always bring up guys like Future or Migos, who I'm a Jay-Z guy. Like, I through and through love Jay-Z.
Here in New York, of course.
Exactly. And that's a guy where, people bring up other other rappers or artists, and I'll go right at them. And one of our pitchers, Nick Mondak, actually, we've got like a 3.5 year or 2.5 year feud running because he's a Lil Wayne guy. And hey, Jay-Z's never had a bad album. Come at me about it. And he talks about the peak of Lil Wayne, and it's fun to have those arguments because you can see personality. You can see the way guys react when they're challenged. Some guys, and you can talk to recruits on the phone, where if you tell them, wow, Future, really? That guy's not for me, man. They go right into a shell. And it's like, well, if I challenge this guy on a field, like, how's he going to react then? He can't even defend a rapper that he likes. And it's a very interesting line of discussion, but it ends up being fun because as pitchers, we do have a little bit more time and a little bit more idle parts of our day where let's talk about some stuff and have some fun.
But it also sounds like, so those questions are fun, but for you in the back of your mind as a coach, you're also using them to kind of analyze the player and how you're going to need to coach them. Would that be fair to say?
Of course. And Nick, I mentioned Nick, but he's a perfect example because that's a guy that if I give him something and he's like, nah, not for me, he'll say it. Like that's the best part as a coach, when you can have a guy who says like, nah, I don't like it. Because everything that he's a left-handed pitcher too, everything that worked for me isn't going to work for him. So I should give suggestions and he should become his best coach eventually. So when he's in professional baseball, we have guys who, have moved on and gotten to that point that they don't have to call me and ask me questions. They can call me and tell me about how their outings were, about the breaking ball that they threw. Because if I'm doing my job right, I've led them to the place where they can coach themselves. And I think that's one of the, without getting too deep into different parts of the recruiting process, I think a lot of guys come to college and will throw, especially pitchers, they'll throw a pitch and they'll turn around and look at coach to tell him if it was good or bad. It's like, you saw it, you threw it, you
Right.
tell me if it was good or bad.
Right.
And I think that's like the lessons generation where guys have been so conditioned to ask somebody if something was good or if it was bad. Well, how did it feel?
Right.
What did you think about it? Because in the end, like what I saw or what I feel might be wrong. And I think that's part of what the data, analytics, all those things can tell us, or it can tell us we're right. And it's an interesting rabbit hole to go down.
Could you give me an example of maybe a talk you've had during your career with a recruit where it was just a conversation or a topic you brought up that was non-baseball related and it impacted the way that you're like, yes, I want this kid, or no, this kid kind of won't fit into the system. And it had nothing, the conversation had nothing to do with the question, had nothing to do with baseball?
The most revealing ones are two areas, and I'll tell you about a specific example, but for me it's two areas. It's how they speak to, talk about, and interact with their family, because in the end, that's going to be such a huge part for us because we're their next family. So if there's not respect for your father or respect for your mother and all the things that they do for you, I don't think it's going to be different for me. Like they've done a lot more for you than I have. So if you can't respect that person, but
but then before you get to the second part, like
yeah.
What kind of questions would you ask to kind of figure that out?
That's less questions than just in conversation. And like, I know like the hot button ones that everyone always makes fun of is like, mommy brings you a Gatorade in the dugout. Like, I think that's like a funny one that everyone laughs at, but like, I'm more, to use an exact example, a kid who walks off the field and hands his dad his bag, like that's one that I'm kind of just out on. Like, dude, he probably bought all the stuff in that bag for you. He drove you here. You can't carry it to the car. And it's just the way that you treat people, because you needed to go to the snack stand and buy some Laffy Taffy and a Gatorade, so you couldn't carry your bag with you when you did. It's just little interactions like that. And how thankful kids are.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say how thankful kids are with the things that their parents do for them. I mean, that's something we try to tell all the kids who come to our camps and all the kids who go to camps that, there's $800-900 that people are paying for camp. Thank your parents. Be grateful for the fact that they took part of the money that they earned to give you an opportunity. And you can tell by talking to kids which kids value that and which kids looked at you and went like, okay, yeah, thanks, Mom. Like,
okay, so then the second part, because I cut you off and I wanted an example. So the family is
yeah,
one thing, and then what would be another area?
other competition. And the biggest one for us, I love basketball players. So you talk about the way that guys react. We had a kid in the recruiting process who had an appendectomy at the end of his high school season. And he was, and I don't want to use this cavalierly, but man enough to say, like, yeah, like I cried when they told me my season was over because I wasn't going to get to play in the playoffs. And it's like, yeah, I want that kid. Like a kid who can honestly say, this means a lot to me and I care. Surprisingly, like that's a part of society now where it's more funny to be ironic and sarcastic and not care. Where caring, like people get called to try hard because they care and they work hard. Like I want a guy who's, like I said, man enough to say, like, yeah, I got my basketball season taken away from me and I cried. Like, okay, like that means it matters to you. It means you care. And that's part of the guy who's successful at St. John's, because St. John's isn't a place that we don't have football. So if you want major college football, don't come. If you're going to be party boy, it's just not the place to be. But if you want an environment where a lot of guys are working hard and pulling in the same direction and really care about their results as a team, it's a pretty cool place to be. And those are the guys who are successful at St. John's, the ones who care about being with their team and with their guys.
I've asked this question a lot, so I know we don't want to go down roads where we've asked the same question to multiple people, but this is one question where I think it's interesting and worthy of being asked.
Of course.
Do you think that you can teach that toughness, that mental toughness to kids, or as I said, I think the exact question to Feder the other day was, is it just an innate ability that, or an innate characteristic that as a coach, you have to see it's there and pull it out of them? Because, you kind of talk about the toughness of a player and, crying, passing your bag to your coach. Like,
that's such a many layered answer.
Okay.
And here's what I'll say. I think for us, we have to evaluate what the baseline mental toughness or whatever you want to call it of a kid is going to be when he arrives on campus. Now that's going to be dependent on his upbringing and his family, the way that he is as a person innately, and the struggles that have been around him. People who haven't struggled generally don't have to tap into mental toughness as much. So the more talented players you get usually end up being, when they arrive on campus, less mentally tough, if you want to use that phrase. However, as with anything, I totally believe mental toughness is a skill. So if that's something that can be honed and taught and developed, hey, everybody's going to come into college with a different level of innate toughness, if you want to call the zero moment or day one when they arrive on campus. Our job as coaches is to progress them forward. And some of the things that we do, we'll put them in situations where they create that or have to. I mean, I'll umpire and just make bad calls on purpose.
Right.
Because it's going to happen. Anybody who's been to a college baseball game has seen bad calls. They're doing it not on purpose.
Anybody who's been to a baseball game has seen bad calls.
It's going to happen. So if you throw a ball that's right on the black away for strike 3 on a 1-2 count, ball, how are you going to react? Because that becomes a trained response. If you turn and look at me and go like, really? It's like, are you going to do that to the ump? Because I know you're doing it in your head if you're going to do it out loud to me. So it's 2-2. Go make a pitch. Now, if it's on 3-2 and the guy walks, like, okay, react to the situation. But that's our job, to develop that in guys. And it can be done through conditioning and Omaha challenges or whatever you want to call them. The other way for us is we've tried to do a lot of reading. And I've talked to quite a few coaches in the past few years that have had a lot of success with that with their teams. So it's something we've put in. We've read
like book clubs.
Yeah. Like the book we're reading now is we're a couple years late on it, but Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah, I don't read anything but Twitter, so go ahead.
That's been a great one so far. I'm just talking about developing the way that you need to be at the baseline level of what you're doing every day. We've read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. That's a great one. I'm a big.
I had another pitching coach the other day tell me that that was the best book he had done with the book club.
Aces, and that one's awesome because guys are interested in it. Like he's a former Marine that he's a bit of a sick pup, and you can kind of read those stories and get jacked up where he goes into a lot of things that I would recommend that book to anybody. And Mental ABCs of Pitching, Toughness by Jay Billis I had started to mention. Like there's a lot of books that if you bounce around and then ask them to, again, using the Socratic method, I won't lead a lot of those discussions. I'll tell them, hey, like next Monday we have a Zoom call with all of our pitchers, and it's going to be, okay, you 4 guys, you're the leaders today. Instead of, because if I'm just sitting there, I get sick of hearing my own voice eventually anyways. Like you guys should probably talk to each other.
So what do you, so what is the goal of the book club, right? How does it help the guys? You know, you say let them kind of ask the questions or lead discussions. Like that's great. We do that in English class. How does it help pitchers?
I think it gives them a different perspective, and it asks them to put themselves in a position where they might not be as comfortable. You ask them to go throw bullpens, they're all into it. And kind of like we talked about before, by putting them or asking things of them, you put them in a position where maybe they don't like to read. Read 12 pages for me today, and let's talk about it. And you can see which guys buy in, you can see which guys don't. And we're very lucky that I haven't had an experience with our guys where someone just shuts it down and they don't care. Because I think part of the culture that's been developed here is that in kind of the opposite of the try hard thing, where if you don't want to do that, like, why are you here? Like, why are you spending all this time with us to not work and to not try hard? So it puts them in a different position, and their thought process changes. I think for a lot of guys, they've never struggled, like I said. But you talk about the fact that you're going to, like, no matter how good you are, you're going to eventually struggle, and you're going to be put in positions where you're going to have to fall back on something that you've never done before. So teaching them different skills and different ways to do that.
What if a kid's not reading the book with you guys? What if he refuses to do that assignment?
I'll be honest, I have not had that yet. How I would react to it, in the end, that's your prerogative. For us, I think, have there been guys who have come to a book club meeting unprepared? I'm sure. I mean, they're college kids. I think we've developed a bit of a relationship where guys feel like they can be honest around us. So if I say something or ask them a question and they say, I don't know, okay, like, I'll move on to the next guy. But I haven't honestly experienced a guy who just says, no, I'm good. Like, luckily.
Do you do any recruiting, or how much recruiting typically have you done using the internet outside of this unprecedented time where that's all we really can do? How much recruiting do you do off the internet?
Identification, but never final decisions for me.
Right. How much identification are you doing?
Yeah, I think if you're not using it, you're making a huge mistake. Like, I mean, I know you've mentioned him in a few of the interviews before, so I'll mention him first. But like what Pitching Ninja and Rob Friedman has done, I mean, it's just opened a door that the exposure that exists for kids now and the way to identify people as a college coach, you're being irresponsible if you're not looking into it. You're selling yourself and your university short. Now, just because you can throw 92 on a indoor mound, like, okay, now you've got my attention, but I'm going to need to come see you play in person. I'm going to need to see, again, how you react with your teammates, how you are as a competitor, and what you care about. And there's guys who will radar gun peak, and okay, that's fine. Like, I think one thing we do is, as coaches now, and this is kind of good going down a different question, but I think we do hold 15 and 16-year-old kids to a standard that we probably couldn't have met when we were those kids. So caring about how hard you throw, like, yeah, fine. Like, why should I be mad at a kid for that? Like, I remember going to tryouts and hearing, oh, you hit 90. And I'm like, oh my God, really? Like, why are we holding that against a kid? Because it's not what we want exactly. Like, they're kids, but you can see a lot more.
I also think a lot of what's available to them is velocity training, you know, like
No doubt about it.
so they're mentally trained to think that that's what's most important. And then I get on here with a lot of you guys and you say that that's definitely not the most important. Like, yes, it's a component of it. But the things that I hear a lot of you guys say are important are not necessarily the things that are always stressed and marketed to them as, hey, come get better, right? You hear a lot more of like arm strengthening and velocity programs than certain pitchability programs.
Well, we're all perpetuators of the same system, because if it didn't matter, you wouldn't see at PBR Futures or any perfect game tournaments 100 coaches sitting back there like this with radar guns. Like, if the velocity didn't matter, we wouldn't measure it. But it becomes at some point a prerequisite to get your foot in the door, to become part of the conversation as a guy who, hey, I don't care how many strikes you throw. If you're throwing 73 as a 2020 grad right now, like, I don't know if that's going to work for us.
Right.
But if you have a certain level of velocity or innate ability, then you put it yourself in the conversation of like, okay, let me see what about the other stuff.
Right.
And that's where we all become guilty in the velocity Olympics, if you will.
2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
The social media stuff you talk about, okay, if I see a kid throwing 92 or something, that, you know, that's interesting to me. I feel like we're seeing a lot of that these days, right? So how many, like, what does that, let's say that post or that video need, what other information does it need to include for you to say, okay, here's one to follow up on? Or is it simply just show me a video of you throwing 92? Like, how do you differentiate between the 7 posts of guys that are throwing 90?
Well, I think I don't pretend to be an expert on what the best delivery is, and I think anybody who says they know a perfect delivery is probably got some snake oil to sell you too. But for a lot of us, we have a different checklist that we go through. And like, for me as a recruiter, I mean, the academics have to be there. I think that's like, again, everybody knows that you have to be at a certain level academically to be able to get through college and to get into college. But as we go down, like, I want to see competitors. I want to see guys who throw their fastball for strikes. I want to see an out pitch. I want to see projectability. I want to see athleticism, and I want to see a good teammate and somebody who gets after it. And then last thing I think is tough to define, but a clean arm that should project for velocity in the future.
Let me just,
you see that from one video? Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Let me clarify a little bit. Like, you did mention some of the things, but my specific question is, let's say in one day you sit down and you see 10 videos on the Flat Ground app of guys throwing 90 miles per hour. Which do you send 10 different messages to find out more? Or is it a matter of, I see a second pitch? Does the post tell me how big he is and his weight and his GPA? You know?
Okay. So I think if I can go through that checklist that I just gave you, and I can check off 3 or 4 of those things, I can start moving forward with a guy. I mean, for us, like, it is a numbers game as well, because as a school in the Northeast, where we're kind of in a, New York, New Jersey, PA, and in New England, like, a lot of schools like to come up here and get after guys that are Southern schools and want to come take our players, if you will. That if we try to just recruit one guy, like, it's not going to play for us. Like, we can't really just go after one left-handed pitcher and say, like, okay, this is the guy. Like, we have to have a list and pursue them all at the same level. And the one who ends up being the right fit as we progress forward in the recruiting process, usually it takes a little bit of time. and because people have to weed themselves through like what they want and what they want in the recruiting process, just like we do. So for us, if we can see some guys who profile for what we like and what we recruit to. If there's 10 of them and 7 of them profile for us academically, we'll reach out to 7, and then 3 of them are in a position where they don't want to be in the city. Okay, well, you cross those 3 off, and it becomes a war of attrition a little bit that way too.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is all process of elimination and attrition, things of that nature. All right, last question for you. You mentioned everybody's out there with radar guns, right? So there's radar guns and there's stopwatches. Those are typically the 2 tools that are going with you on the recruiting trail, right?
Yeah.
If you could invent a new tool that could measure something out there, and not measure mental toughness or
the heart monitor.
what would you to get some sort of metrics out there? What's something you'd like to be able to get at a game but you can't, and you would love to invent a tool to do it?
That is a good question. So I don't know how you could do this, but if we're getting into like the deep dive, if you could find a way to, with what a guy sees in his decision making or the way that he approaches the game, if you could find a way to gauge feel for the game, if you will. So if you could put some type of a glasses or a monitor on a shortstop and test his route or test the way that he attacks a ball or what he sees and where he's looking, or the same thing with a catcher, or even with a hitter, like what he sees as I guess.
I get what you're saying. Like,
if you could find a way to get into their feel for the game.
Literally, how are they out there on the field watching the game? Like from their position, what are the different things that they're taking a look at?
Yeah, because I think if we have anything now, we have more skilled players than any era. I think based on the velocity, based on the things that you see from players today, speed, the ability to hit the ball a long way. Like, I think we have more skilled players, but we have less baseball players because they're taught to showcase, and they're doing what they're a product of a certain system. So finding a way to find baseball players who are skilled at the same time would be a really cool metric to try to figure out. I don't know how you would. But
yeah, no, that's super cool, actually. Like, put on glasses on the shortstop and see if he's checking an outfielder's position, right? See if he's looking over at the second baseman. Like, is he communicating with his third baseman, and how much is he moving? Like, that's super cool.
Yeah. I don't know how you would do it, but I mean, they figured out some other stuff that'd be pretty cool.
I mean, aren't you basically somewhat talking about putting a little camera on? I mean, I've seen some stuff like on ESPN, you're putting a little camera on the hat. I just feel like if you do that, right, then kids are going to start to look around more because they know. Yeah,
you'd have to do it in a way that they don't know.
Can we just embed it in the logo on their hat, you know?
I guess maybe the way would be God, we're getting really deep into this. If you found a way to put them onto a field where they didn't know what was happening, and they could look around, and you could track a person's gaze. I mean, there's ways to do a lot of cool stuff.
I bet you there's somebody already out there that's like, yeah, we can do that. We've done it.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah.
But that would be cool. Well, Coach Brown, I appreciate you coming on here representing St. John's, and
absolutely.
It was fun to just kind of talk a little bit more casual about approaching players, approaching recruiting. Definitely some new information in there about Laffy Taffy and giving your bag to dad when you get off the field, and dealing with pitchers by just, casual conversations about music and book clubs and things like that. Different styles for kids to see. So good stuff, man. We still made it different, a new episode. So thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. And I appreciate what you're doing for all of us, because, I've gone through and watched a bunch of episodes with the other pitching coaches throughout the country that you've kind of checked in with, and the information is there. And I think that's one thing that we all have to be is, I know it's become a cliche saying, but like lifelong learners, that if you feel like you can't, because I watched the episode with DeLeo from NGIT the other day, and that's a kid who's 26 and comes from a background where I think a lot of people would discount what he has to say because he's a D3 guy, which that doesn't matter. Like you need to be able to listen to people and find value in what they have to say, because no matter what, there's something there. And I think it's really cool.
And he's going places. Everybody I've talked to, I had a bunch of guys watch that episode and say, and I was like, am I seeing things or thinking the wrong way? Or is this, is this a special young guy that's going to go somewhere? And all of them were like, yeah, he gets it.
Yeah. And that's in the end, what we all have to do is we all have to find people to influence us. And just because, I mean, we tell the same to freshmen and sophomores, hey, you can lead because you're a young guy. Just because you're a young guy doesn't mean that you can't teach guys who are a little bit older than you.
Well, good. Keep watching, man, and tell everybody to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free. There's a lot of information there, right?
No doubt, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Coach, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Take it easy, man.
Bye.